Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics, brought to you by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the writer of comics like X-Men Red, Venom, Wasp, The Upcoming Fury, and more. It's Al Ewing. Thanks for coming on, Al.
Hello. Yeah, no, good to be here.
How's the day been for you?
It's not as productive as I'd like. There are on days and there are off days. So far, this has been an off day. I'm hoping that'll change after this podcast. I'm hoping this will get the juices flowing.
Is there a reason why it was kind of off day, or like were you working on something that was particularly tricky?
I was up really late last night doing my newsletter. It was quite a heavy one. Those always take a very long time to write a little bit. I mean, by the time this comes out, horrifically, this will all be old news, but there's been some news stories over this past weekend, that have been very difficult, very unpleasant. And yeah, basically just sort of occasionally when, sometimes my move then on my newsletter is to sort of not bring that up because people come, to read the comics, to hear about what comics are coming out. Sometimes I don't feel good about ignoring what's going on in the world, so I bring it up, and then I kind of, I don't know, in a vague effort to kind of, I guess, do something, I sort of put down links to like what I think might be helpful charities, or, just some sort of positive affirmation for anyone who's feeling as brought down as I am. I was up like late last night, like it's so late it was early kind of thing.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So I didn't get as much sleep as I should have. And then, I've been running behind all day. But with a bit of luck, I can sort of be a bit of a night owl tonight and get some work done at night. My circadian rhythms are all over the place. There are times when I'm up at like 7:00, and then slowly that ebbs away, and I'm up till 4 a.m.
Well, first off, I want to say, I actually think that one of the things about newsletters that is great is like you get to see the person. It's not just like this is an automaton reporting your latest releases and stuff like that. So I think it's good to represent that type of stuff. Second off, I will say you're not alone when it comes to all over the place sleeping schedules with comics creators. I mean, I just had Jamie McKelvey on, and he was saying about, I think we were recording basically at the exact same time, and he was like, my day's basically just starting. And sometimes you just got to roll with what you got. And also, I mean, even beyond sleep schedules, I imagine inspiration kind of hits when it hits, right? That's not really something you can control.
I mean, it's not good to rely on that, because like you get into a thing where like inspiration kind of never hits, and then, people need pages, and suddenly it turns into like deadline terror.
Yeah.
So the best thing you can do is just sit down in front of a blank page and kind of, maybe not sort of bludgeon yourself against it, but sort of attempt to kind of just get something down, just sort of get something in motion. I've been told by editors that I'm not the worst, but I'm kind of, I try to make sure artists sort of stay fed and have pages like before they've finished the last batch and all of this. And at my best, I'm delivering a nice full script full of stuff. Sometimes it's like I have to stop at a scene and just get it into the inbox because, end scene here, and we'll continue later because, it's just not the thing I thought would flow like water, or, the thing that has taken me like 4 days.
Yeah.
It happens sometimes. It happens a lot. It's, it's how it is. But I mean, I think waiting for inspiration in that circumstance when your brain is kind of the enemy, it's not a great strategy. You do have to kind of sit down, with your coffee in the morning and go, right, today I am doing this, and kind of hammer it until you've at least got something.
I know that we do dramatically different types of writing, but sometimes I find that when I do that kind of brute force method, where I kind of like force myself to get through something where I don't really feel like writing, I find that sometimes I actually get into the rhythm and like the momentum hits because I've kind of pushed through. Now, that won't always come, and sometimes you just have to keep brute forcing it. But I do think it's interesting. We were talking before we started recording about, like, you do have a lot of projects.
Yeah.
I mean, the funny thing is that introducing it as X-Men Red feels like disingenuous at this point, because currently it's Storm and the Brotherhood of the Mutants. And then you also, I mean, it is X-Men Red, but it's X-Men Red in another form. And then you have your X-Men Before the Fall, the Heralds of Apocalypse one-shot coming up.
Yes.
Venom, Wasp, an upcoming Fury one-shot. Assuredly other things we don't know about. And I imagine that to some degree, your writing schedule is at least somewhat dictated by those things, those external forces you're talking about, where it's like artists need to be fed, deadlines need to be hit, et cetera, et cetera.
pretty much entirely. It's like there are days when you need to get something done, you need to get something in. It's got to be in there. At that point, you do brute force it. There are times when brute forcing it isn't the move. Like when you you end up trying that, but it only really comes together when you step away and you grab a shower, you do the washing up, go down to the corner shop to get some milk, whatever. It's whatever little errand or task you need to get done. That's when it comes. That's when it hits you because you've got your time. When you are doing something else, but your brain is ticking over. And there's also the other issue is that working method is that there's always the part of your brain that wants to think about the thing that you are not working on right now.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's tough. There are people who have very good schedules, and they have an office and they have like all this stuff, and they have special times in the day when they write. And I am not yet one of those people. Maybe I can get there someday. So far, it's not happening.
Where does conceptualization or like pitches or things like that come in? Because like obviously you have to have time to like lay out your plan for X-Men Red, or like for something like We Only Find Them When They're Dead, your 15-issue Boom series that just wrapped recently. You have to have time to, come up with your pitch for Boom, come up with what that's going to be, et cetera, et cetera. The stuff outside of scripting. I'm not even going to bring up the fact that you have to do podcasts and stuff like that. But I mean, where does that time come in?
That's like that's kind of a day's work. What generally a pitch is like, and then this is something I've noticed rather than something I've planned, but generally like half of the pitch is sort of ideas percolating around as you kind of muddle through the week or so before they need it. And then, the designated day when it's time to deliver, the other half is you sit down, you type up everything you've been thinking. That typing all that up creates more ideas. And sometimes this is a repeated process. Sometimes I'll sort of type everything up and I'll be like, this isn't quite there yet. And I'll go away and think about it for a couple of days and then I'll come back and type that up and, rework everything. And it's like, there are some pitches which probably won't see the light of day that are very much kind of streams of consciousness, streams of thought, in that there's one that didn't end up going through, didn't make it in the end. And, 10 years from now, I'll tell that story. What I did there was I had a thought document where I just kind of, this is all my thoughts about this particular property or this particular area. And then I kind of, having written this giant thing, which was like thinking out loud almost, I then wrote a separate document, which was the actual pitch, which was kind of, okay, let's put this in some kind of order. And, that's connected to what the issues will look like. And that turned out really good, even though it didn't get picked up. So I did the same again for a thing that did get picked up that was more like, the kind of the document, the thoughts document and the pitch document kind of bled more into one because it was for an editor I have a very good rapport with, who knows what I think. And also I trusted the process was the other half of it.
Mm-hmm.
But like, that was very much a case of like, okay, here's my overview. Here's all the basic thoughts I've been having about this, thing, this IP. To put it in very corporate terms. Okay, here's all these thoughts. Now, with that in mind, let's go into issue 1. Here's how that breaks down, and explaining every beat as I put it down. And then it's like, so let's now let's talk more about like why that has to be issue 1, and then let's move on to issue 2, and this guy, and it turned into a kind of almost like a conversational thing.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that worked out kind of really. And then at the end of it, it was I'm just pitched the first arc essentially. I was then like, okay, so where are we going from here? And that was where the kind of, oh, well, now that I've sort of explained all of it and sort of explained it as much to myself, here's where it could all go from here, and here's all the different stories we could do, and this is like, this could be a 50 issue, or if we get the runway, and it's like, and that's a really good moment when you start kind of, when you've got that blast off point, and then you can really just go for it. But yeah, it's kind of a really sort of the art of pitching. I don't think there's 2 pitches I've done that have ever been exactly the same in terms of format or in terms of like, what they were trying to do, and there has never been a pitch that has survived to that has survived contact with actually writing this stuff.
Right.
The big example of this, I don't know if it's ever been reprinted, and this is probably the reason why, but I went back and took a look at like the final Immortal Hulk pitch before I got the job. There's a whole bunch of stuff in that about this is what I think Bruce Banner is, this is what I think the Hulk is, this is what we will not do, this is what we will do, da-da-da. None of that survived. You know, it's like there was a thing in there. It's like, okay, I don't think we're never going to see the Hulk kill anybody. Like issue 8, boom, he kills somebody. It's like, well, it had to happen. You know, the story demanded it at that point. It was like, and this is what always happens. You know, your pitch is. I can't, in all good conscience, say that it's a roadmap. It's like it's a guide. It's a sort of set of waypoints. But like the story, as you write it, will dictate so much of what it turns out to be. That like you can't, you know, you can declare your intentions, but like you can't control what the future will be. And you know, if nothing else, because if you're working for a company like Marvel that operates in a shared universe, your marble is one of 100 marbles bouncing around the pinball table. You know, it's like you're gonna ricochet off a couple of things, and you know, those either help you or they don't. You know, those either, or rather, either you use those impacts to your advantage, or you just sort of bounce helplessly. And you know, there's always a way to sort of pivot or ricochet off something in your way in a way that helps you. I've found it's not always possible to persuade the reader that like this tie-in is as essential as all of the rest of the issues, but you know, that's an entirely separate problem, and it's a problem of marketing.
I do think that, I mean, we've talked about this before. I wrote an entire article about how you're the king of the tie-in because you're really, really good at doing that. But it's not just tie-ins. I do think I was reading an interview with, God, it was either you or it was Kieran, but it was about that when Judgment Day hit, you wanted to go, I think it was with Kieran. It was like you wanted to go all in on Uranos, destroying Arakko and X-Men Red because it gave you this opportunity to mix things up and test the Arakai. And I thought that was really interesting because a lot of writers, I don't know, some writers, I'm not going to say a lot of writers, but some writers don't really like their toys being messed with as much as possible. Like they want their domain to be their domain. Obviously, in a shared universe, that's problematic and is going to be challenged a whole lot. But you seem to enjoy the challenge of external forces changing up the landscape of your domains to some degree. I'm sure there are limits to that, but you know, what's appealing to that about that idea to you as a writer?
I think there's a difference between like especially when you get a lot of advance warning. And obviously, you know, I was on the X Slack. We were talking about Arakko being a big part of Judgment Day, and yeah, I did. You know, I did say to Kieran, you know, I do want to be involved. I want to be kind of a part of this because you know this is going to be. I mean, I think this is around the time. I think it was like we can't just kind of ignore this. As we were planning Judgment Day was around the same time we were deciding that Magneto was probably going to die. So suddenly those things come together and it's like, well, he needs to die doing something. And it's like he can die doing this. There was also the need to kind of get X-Men Red sort of bulletproofed a little bit. It's like, it's not that we were in danger exactly, but there was like a certain amount of, well, how do we make sure we need to make it 100% certain that they give us, you know, our issue 10.
Right.
So we can get to this point. And, you know, I was doing stuff like, I don't know, I was going to have a Spider-Man Wolverine clone at some point, which is an idea that hit the cutting room floor. But I was like, and this is thinking that eventually gave birth to John Ironfire, which is like, what if we had a second Wolverine?
Yeah.
What if we invented a new Wolverine? Like,
now we're cooking with gas.
Can't be that difficult. And there was this character who, like, for the longest time we were just referring to in the sack as like, yeah, Logan 2. And this is when we meet Logan 2. And it's like, and that eventually became John Ironfire. He made his debut in Storm of the Brotherhood 1. And yeah, people seem to love him. He was sort of designed to hit a bunch of boxes. And the nice thing is that he's become a really interesting character to write as well.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, hopefully, because, you know, if it's just a cynical exercise, you know, readers can smell that. But like we did want to kind of do, what's the most cynical thing we could do? Let's invent a new Wolverine. And then it was kind of like, oh no, wait, we can actually make a serious attempt at like getting that magic in there.
You know what's funny about that character is when I was reading that first issue, I was like, was this character created before now? And I just missed it. But that's one of the funny things, though, is there's ways you can do it where you make it a big deal of like this first appearance or whatever. It's like, this character shows up, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But there's also the one, which I think you do really well, where you kind of like speak things into existence, where it's like the implied history is there because he has this relationship with Storm and anything could have happened in the last 10 years between Storm bouncing out and then. And I don't know. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I think you're good at this type of stuff is like you could look at all these external forces as constraints, but you look at I don't know. I'm speaking for you, but you kind of seem like you use it as opportunities.
I mean, that's the idea. That's the ideal. But yeah, I mean, with that, we were kind of we knew we needed like to ironclad it to bulletproof it. So because I knew that if we were doing the big thing on Araco, that had to be like 2 issues of war and 1 issue of like aftermath, which ended up as kind of like 2 issues of war and like one as kind of a brief breather before Judgment Day kind of ended. So we still got to have like the fun stuff with the Celestial in there. That was the point where we were like, oh wait, there is a way we can absolutely bulletproof this. What if Magneto dies? And it was one of those things, no, we can't do that. No, that's stupid. We can't kill Magneto. That's crazy. And I was like, yeah, but what if we did? What if he died? What if we did this and then this and then this? And it was like, what if his heart gets torn out and he's moving his blood around with his magnetic powers? And it's like, we can kind of have our cake and eat it a little bit. He can have all these moments, these final moments. And then he can die giving this big speech where he's like, oh, watch Charles. And then, all this stuff. And it's like, that's the kind of, because that grew out of constraints. That grew out of like a kind of a mixture of a slight degree of paranoia about the survival of the boat.
Mm-hmm.
And we might have been very overly paranoid about that because it's like, it's issue 1 that people loved issue 1. People 1, 2, 3, 4. They were all, if we hadn't had the battle with Araco, it would have been, a successful book. It would have been fine. People did love it. People did buy it. But like the other thing was, having kind of the desire to do something big in concert with Judgment Day. And yeah, if not for Judgment Day, I would have probably engineered a conflict with Orcus or brought forward some of the Abigail Brand stuff.
Mm-hmm.
There was an original version of X-Men Red that was much slower paced. This was long before any of these conversations. This was like when I first pitched the book. It was a much more slow paced Game of Thrones things, and like the issue 5, the trade ending beat was Magneto killing Tom. And it was like, we can do that much faster. We can compress that in a way that like makes it very intense. And then we can have issue 4, the ramifications of that. And then we can go into issue 5, and that's the Judgment Day stuff. And that worked out really well because I think people did appreciate the sort of bang after bang after bang kind of factor.
Yeah.
More than maybe they would have a sort of a companion title to Immortal, where it's these sort of this kind of council, but with a different council.
Mm-hmm.
But like, because it gives people 2 different flavors instead of sort of 2 similar flavors. I mean, these are a lot of this is a lot of like items from the cutting room floor. In that there are probably going to be people who are like, rushing off to write clickbait articles or whatever. It's like, oh, it could have been the master plan. What could have been? And it's like, literally, this is like, it's literally, how about this? I think we could speed it up. Literally that level of conversation.
I do think the interesting thing about what you're saying, though, is yeah, you could take this as like, this is stuff from, I mean, this literally is stuff from the cutting room floor, and like people could write about this, but I mean, this is how comics get made. And I think you would probably agree that this version ended up being better because you sped it up.
Oh yeah. No, this is, I feel like those first 5 issues are the best first 5 issues of X-Men Red that could exist.
Right.
Barring like perfecting every little, barring having like, a year to work on each one and perfecting every little fractional thing. It's like, yeah, definitely everything that happened in the process of making the sausage, I think, improved it to kind of bounce off that point, this is not unique to the X-Books. This is how every comic is made.
Absolutely.
It's this mishmash of decisions and counter decisions, and like, we don't give you the blow by blow on this stuff because it's like, because it's happening in every book, we can't remember it all. I mean, I was having real trouble with like the timeline of events of like exactly when we decide to kill Magneto. Also, it's like this kind of, it doesn't make the final product any better or more interesting. It's just sort of, I'm a huge process nerd. I love hearing about the process, and in that sense, it's nice to sort of hear a little bit, even though, with my memory and my shaky grasp of time and dates and everything, I'll probably, every time I tell these stories, I'll probably tell them like in contradictory ways. But like, there's at least a version of events there. The thing that annoys me a little bit is the kind of Hickman master plan of it all. Like, we got together and we stabbed him on the steps of the Senate, and then, we took over Rome.
You didn't?
Yeah, no, we didn't.
Oh, okay.
But it's like, it's like this thing of like, as if comics are constantly in motion, constantly changing, as if, there's any plan that has ever survived contact with the writer's own thoughts a week later.
There was a line you had in an interview about Fury. Or no, it wasn't an interview, it was the press release. It was an amazing line. You said that Nick Fury is an entire history of comics in one character because he evolved alongside the superhero comics genre, effectively. He went from like war guy to spy guy to cosmic guy, and with a lot of guys in between. Now he's a completely different guy. That's just the nature of comics, though. It's like it's a constant flow.
It is so fascinating to me because I had this impression hearing about, because my first exposure to Nick Fury was in a POW annual 1968 I got from a jumble sale with a reprint of the very first Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. story where he's in the big bathtub and, there's all the LMDs in the flying car and all of the stuff, and it's just throwing stuff at you every page. He throws a chair out of a window for no reason, and that's why he's the man for the job. Like, there's a wire leading to it. I mean, look around any room now and, like, try and spot where all of the wires are leading to. But, like, back in the day, chairs did not have wires.
Right.
So he hurled it out of the window. But, and, there's that great page where it's the helicarrier. It's, the first, and reading that, your mind would explode. But, like, at the very same time as that was going on, there was also an issue of Sergeant Fury, because Sergeant Fury went on for like 100 issues or something. It was like
that's the war one, right?
Yeah, and then went to reprints. It was like the Howling Commandos, yeah. And in that, Nick Fury is a younger guy with two eyes, and it's like so you have being published at the same time. In fact, I'm pretty sure Sergeant Fury just sort of lasts longer and is published more regularly than the Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. stuff, which is sort of back like half of Strange Tales, and then it's its own thing for a little while, and then it sort of gets around again. And Sergeant Fury is just like plugging away, because I guess war comics are always popular, always like the bread and butter. You would have to find a comics historian who knew all about the sales of the various genres through the 60s to kind of. But yeah, I'm pretty certain that like these two two visions of Nick Fury were coexisting, just set 20 years apart.
Right.
And that's such a fascinating idea. And I don't know if that was ever, aside from like vague, there wasn't like a Captain America War Stories comic at the same time there was, Captain America in the modern day comic. There wasn't like, over at DC, they didn't give like Sergeant Rock a kind of modern day spy thing. It's like, characters sort of keep to their own era. Either it's modern day or it's historical, but it's like Nick Fury having this thing. And you start seeing these Sergeant Fury comics where like they're trying to hint towards, oh man, how did he lose the eye? We're going to tell you how he lost the eye. And it's like, I feel like Sergeant Fury 50 was like, there's this one Sergeant Fury comic where it's like how Sergeant Fury lost his eye, and it's like, and at the end he's sort of like he's kind of hit with something or jabbed with something, in combat, and it's like, oh, you've nearly lost the eye, Sergeant Fury, but we've just remembered that you canonically lose it at a later date. We've just remembered that you've still got your two eyes in the Korean War. One day you'll lose sight in that eye, Fury, but we don't know when.
And now, a quick word from our sponsor. The comics crowdfunding platform Zoop is rolling through 2023 with even more projects from incredible creators. This February, support campaigns such as 9 Lives from New York Times bestselling writer Steve Horton, the new Scarlet Twilight from Ben Morse, Gilgamesh Eternal from Cam Kirkhow, Volume 3 of the super successful Sex, Spies, and Rock and Roll series, and The Magic Necklace from indie comics superstar editor Claire Napier. There are even more live campaigns and more surprises to be added throughout the month, so check out zoop.gg for more. It takes less than 30 seconds to sign up, and the checkout is easy and intuitive. Add multiple rewards and add-ons to your cart, provide some info during the checkout, and you're done. No confusing additional steps in finalizing your pledge, and no post-campaign surveys. Looking to crowdfund your project? Email Zoop at hello@wearezoop.com to start a campaign and learn more at blog.zoop.gg. And now, back to the show. One of the interesting things about this, you're very good at operating within the flow. Like we've talked about that. But I also think one of the things that's interesting about what you do is you often feel like you're operating in your own space to some degree beyond like X-Men Red's obvious connection to the larger X-Men line. Like, you know, it's like Defenders and Defenders Beyond is basically existing within Marvel history. Like the Ant-Man book is existing kind of in between other storylines and also in the future and things like that. Wasp is kind of able to do its own thing. I know you're quite adept at working within continuity, but do you sort of like having your own space to operate in, or is that not something you think of because you're always thinking of it as part of the larger whole?
It's kind of having both at once. You sort of want to operate off the mechanisms of the shared universe. It's a wonderful thing where it's like 90% synchronicity and serendipity, in that like the history of this shared universe is created out of how many hundreds of different people all bolting something new onto it and all sort of doing their own thing. And you know, it's like, but out of all of that, all these people with their different ideas in different directions, you can kind of notice like patterns emerging. And there's something really great when you sort of see a pattern and see how you can create a pattern out of that, all of those unintended elements. There's also something in being able to be sort of alone to work. One of the things we did on the Hulk book, which was part of the pitch at the time, was the idea that like, okay, we're not gonna cross over. We're never gonna do a tie-in issue. When the rubber met the road on that, and like, oh, we'd love to have, you know, we want the Hulk in this thing. We'd love to, you know, can you facilitate that? And it's like, well, I'm definitely going to want to do something about how it got there. But that became like the origin of these sort of big special issues, which were kind of almost like our annuals, these kind of, and we do the tie-in in these separate places. But that was basically so we had room to work. So we had room to kind of do our own thing, do what we wanted to do. I guess I've also got a habit of connecting to my own stuff, but that's sort of, I sort of leave these things around and I kind of plant these seeds and I see if anybody's ever going to get back to them. And then if they don't, then they're fair game for me down the line. And the kind of result of that over the years is that I've sort of built a kind of weird skeleton running through the Marvel universe.
You described continuity to me as flavor once. It's like you can just kind of add it and everything like that. And it's like,
oh yeah.
Yeah, it's like you're putting some spices up on the board for everyone. They can pick it up and use it, or maybe you'll pick it up and use it later. I do think one thing that's interesting about Immortal Hulk, and like I don't want to presuppose anything for you, but structurally speaking, it kind of seems ideal for the way you work because the main series, as you said, kind of had its space. And then you had the tie-ins. Like, I really love the King in Black tie-in, but that was like a separate one-shot that you did with, I think, Aaron Cooter, where it was just like this silent horror story. And it was, well, a horror story, but it was also like a children, it was like basically like the child within Hulk and everything. It was a really great book, but you had the space to, well, I mean, it was basically have your cake and eat it too. You had like the main thread that was untouched, and then the rest of the stuff was where you got to play with the universe to some degree.
I mean, the thing with those specials, those time specials. Now, I feel like I've said this in public, but it was definitely how we talked about them in private. Was that they were designed to serve two masters, in that it was like we would do our GT by the crossover, we would do what the crossover win needed us to do. We could sort of say how this character came to be involved, do a kind of, but these would also be adverts for the main book. We would always try to do something where there was something interesting about them. There was something special about them. And it was like, if you like this, maybe try the main series. That is a structure I want to get back to. I do want to do another 50 issue run, which is taking those big swings. I'd want to run it the same way. I'd want to, without, the elements that were not so good. But in terms of doing 50 issues, swing for the fences, trying to tell something big with a character, I do want to do it again. There's an element of, I want to have another crack at it. I want to see if I can get it perfect this time. Because I feel like since then I've sort of gone back to my old ways a little bit. I've done a lot of sort of short fun pieces, and it was great to get back to that kind of thing and get back to but there is that hunger in me to do a big special project again. So
the longer runs are a lot more, even since Immortal Hulk, a lot more rare than they were. 50 issue runs don't just pop up very often. But I did want to ask about, I don't want to, I'm certainly not going to say you're typecast, because you do, as I'm going to cover later, there's some things where you really throw some curveballs in there. But I do think that you're particularly good at playing with history, whether it's Defenders or Wasp, Ant-Man or Fury. Well, I haven't read Fury yet, but at the same time, I presume it's going to be a very good comic in the way that yours always are. But you play in space a lot. You're kind of the space guy. You're not writing Guardians, but at the same time, space seems like your domain.
I've given up my sort of fiefdom over space for a while. I tried to, and this was kind of this was as COVID was hitting, and I'm not sure it played super well even then. But I did have a thing at one point where I was like, hey, if you're doing anything in space or with aliens, can you let me know about it so I can kind of stick a pin on my giant political map and see what all the aliens are doing this week. And for the most part, that all worked out. But I'm no longer that guy. I don't have a map on my wall. I'm not doing, I'm not sticking pins in it. I was the space guy. I think everything I'm doing now in terms of space is sort of basically trying to kind of clean up, just sort of kind of, they're all coming out of that period, because Sword and X-Men Red were kind of continuations of threads begun in Empire and Guardians, and also, plans that we had after X of Swords when the Sword Station came back. Kind of leftovers from the days when the idea was to have Sword and Guardians as complementary books, which would have required more sort of crossover between X fans and space fans than there ended up being, I think. I think there were most X fans didn't particularly want to know about the Guardians. Most Guardians fans, I don't think, particularly wanted to know about Sword. The crossover we were hoping for.
I was at the center of that Venn diagram, Al. Just right there.
Good. I'm glad that was well.
There was me. One thing I think is interesting is Ant-Man, Wasp, and Fury are kind of, I don't want to say mining the same territory. They're 60th anniversary pieces. Fury's a bit different because it's a one shot, but it is similar in theory in the sense that you're kind of playing off of the history of those characters and everything.
I think when people, I've written, that one's entirely written now. I think when people read it, they'll probably note some similarities to how I approach Ant-Man. A little bit.
Wasp was way different, obviously, but one thing I think is interesting is there's a version of the world where those three books are very similar, and I suspect that would probably be a world where you didn't write all three of them, or anyone didn't write all three of them because they didn't want to intentionally be repetitive. But how do you stay out of ruts or traps of repetition in your work? Is that something you actively think about when you're approaching a project, or is that largely outside of your mind because you're just looking for the right answers?
If I've done something before, I'll try not to do it again. But at the same time, there are certain recurring themes that crop up in my work because, everything I do is at least slightly personal. I do try not to get into ruts. I try not to repeat myself. There are themes that kind of continue. I had two separate books, one 50 issues, one 5 issues, end with the character speaking to God, essentially. But one of them was meant to be kind of related to the other, I guess, a little bit, in that, these two scenes were not. The idea isn't that, you read the end of Hulk and then, you want your mind clean before you read the end of Defenders. They're sort of they are, they are meant to be kind of taken as, one happens after the other. You're meant to have read them both. It's tricky because there's sort of, I guess people could get sick of doing stuff where I try to call back to I try to pastiche a specific era or do my Stan Lee voice. I am very conscious that the Stan Lee voice there's a limited number of times I can do that before people start getting, oh my God, pastiching Stan Lee again. But it's so much fun to do.
Yeah.
And I feel like as long as I'm having fun, as long as I keep a weather eye on whether I am the only one having fun.
Yeah.
I feel like it's okay.
For the record, I think you're very good at this. I think you're very good at avoiding repetition. Like, even when you do have, like, the Defenders thing and the Immortal Hulk one, those felt completely different because they were born from completely different situations. And both of them make sense. But I do want to talk about, like, rhythms and like how you kind of approach writing, because one of the things that I think you're particularly good at, and I talked about this with Polygon Susanna Polo on the podcast not long ago. We both think you're amazing at the quote unquote mic drop moments, like page turns. Like my favorite in recent memory was in I want to say X-Men Red 9, and it was Bobby on the throne in Xandra's place.
Yeah.
And he's like on fire and he looks amazing. And like Stefano Caselli, I think it was Stefano Caselli, just absolutely nailed that moment. And then on top of that, there was also, like you mentioned this one earlier, the Magneto, like still alive, pumping his blood with his powers and everything. And it just says, what was it? It was the Seat of Loss takes command, and it says you always make sure. Actually, knowing that you kind of felt on edge about the book's future kind of makes you always make sure feel like a little meta at this point. But
it's like by the time I wrote that page, we knew for a fact.
You made sure.
I would not end an issue 5 like that if I didn't know we were going to get an issue 6.
That's true.
It's like, we knew a long time before that we had the full, 10 issues and then into Sins of Sinister.
Are those types of beats something you like, those mic drop moments? Are those something you actively try to work in?
Very rare that I will end an issue not on a splash page.
Sure.
That's a Morrison thing, which I imprinted on very early on. I think back in Doom Patrol when I was like a young reader of Doom Patrol, and he'd end things on a splash, and he'd end Animal Man on a splash. It's a Morrison tick that I copied, stolen, but it works. It works so well because it's like, I remember finishing issues of like Secret Wars and Secret Wars 2, and it's just like this thin panel at the bottom of the thing of like all of the heroes sort of going, oh, well, Beyond the suddenly had us that time. And then there's this giant bump underneath that going like, but where's the Beyonder going next? Join us next time. And it's like, you've got to have that join us next time thing. These days you don't get that. It's fallen out of fashion. So you've got to get people excited. The splash ending has that that power to kind of get you excited for the next issue. If you do it right, if you do that page turn right. And the other thing I do, there's a thing, once you see it, you can't unsee it because I can't stop doing it, which is a page ends with a voice coming from a panel, and then you see who it is.
Oh, yeah.
On the next page, like a little mini cliffhanger. And I do that one all the time because it's the easiest mini cliffhanger to do. And it makes for great intros of characters to the scene. And it's like, I can't stop myself. It's like...
It's classic.
It's a classic. And I'll do it several times an issue. It's like, it's like my main spice that I add. It's, my main ingredient. But I'm very conscious of the spreads. I sort of, when I'm writing an issue, I do kind of write for the trade in that I kind of live in a fantasy land where there are no adverts, which is not reality in that, you'll get an advert and that'll throw off all of the page steps. But in the trade, there are no adverts, even pages are your left-handers, odd pages are your right-handers. I just plot that way. I don't have it in me to ask where all the adverts are in the physical book because it's like, I'm not saying wait for the trade, but I'm saying the trade will be on your shelf longer than the individual issue. So, in terms of plotting for the adverts, I do plot for a hypothetical issue without them. And I try to keep some control over them by having at least one double spread in every issue.
Mm-hmm.
But with X books, we have the 2 data pages, and those can land anywhere. And what those are like pages that would otherwise be ad space or a recap page if we didn't have the title spread doing that job. But like, they're house, what I call house pages, pages that are designated by, and sometimes I'll use those in, I remember like Hickman got in some flack from critics who didn't understand the nature of house pages by like using them for interstitials and title pages and design stuff and charts and everything he does. And like people go, these are story pages you're just wasting on the title of this section of the year. And it's like, no, it's free stuff. You're getting extra free stuff. It's fine. Count the pages, count the story pages. And I mean, I had somebody going, I read this in digital and there's only like 17 pages. It's like, yeah, there's a lot of spreads and they've all got a lot of information being carried. It's like, what was it? It's like, yeah, this issue's only 13 pages long. And it's like, no, it's just all spreads.
Yeah.
I wrote it as a sequence of double page spreads. That's what's going on here. But like, so you get that. But the house pages, you have to kind of plan for those. And so I do have a thing where, if a single, it's very rarely like a double data page. If like a single data page goes in there, I'll like have a little note going like, okay, I'm going to put a data page here. From here on, spreads are odd even. And that's as much to myself as anyone else. And then I'll be like, okay, this is like, I have to remember that the page turns on an odd number now until I put the second data page in when it goes back to normal. So, and the second data page, if I want that page turned to the splash ending, data page has to go in, before that. So another thing to keep an eye on. All of this stuff, it's all about those page turns and the moment. I'm a big fan of moments, like momentism, the art of kind of hooking the emotions of the reader with one big moment that kind of, I feel like you kind of got to, I'm not above writing, a dumb comic. I will very happily write an extremely stupid, funny comic. But like when I am writing something like very intellectual and, trying to be about like some deep thoughts that I've had, I'll always try to make sure to put in those big emotional beats because that's what grabs you, that's what you remember. And then you do think about the deep thoughts and you do think about all of the stuff, and it's like those emotional beats need space because space is importance in the world of comics. So it's like, somebody zinger might get just a little panel. If it's the big twist or the big kind of emotional punch, that gets a decent chunk of a spread or, sometimes a splash page.
I say this with love. Maybe the dumbest comic you've ever written. An 80s action movie in single issue form for a one shot, Cable Reloaded.
Oh, man.
I have no idea if you wrote that as an 80s action movie, but it felt like one.
I thought you were going to say Infinity Warps.
Oh, no.
Because that was ridiculous. But like Cable
Reloaded was intentionally dumb. You had like one-liners that were completely like 80s action movie riffs in there. Like
it was designed as a kind of, we'd just come out of 12 issues of quite sort of emotional stuff with Kid Cable. Old man Cable was back. The Cable, I love is back. It was like the idea was to kind of do Cable at his most 90s, his most kind of like, if you had any emotional attachment to Kid Cable at all, you are probably hurting right now. The intent was not to like rub salt in the wound by like making a dumb comic, but it was like, it'll be okay. This guy is fun too. This is somebody who is. And also I wanted to kind of sort of play in that space of like, Cable is in on his own joke.
Oh, yeah.
He is like, the way I think about Cable is that he's been a dad for a long time. He's sort of, he is Hope's dad, but he has a lot of dad humor. I mean, he'll sort of, so I'll do things where he'll kind of like, he'll say some, ridiculous kind of action movie line as a kind of, and, he's fully aware of like, he's entirely aware of his whole vibe. He's, this isn't something where we're laughing at him. We're sort of laughing with him.
Yeah.
In that he is like, Yeah, I do think of Cable as a sort of quite a kind of laid back and funny guy. I don't think of him as this sort of Punisher type where he's kind of growling and grimacing. I try to maintain that balance between like on the mission, because it is a mission. He's sort of very kind of like, okay, I've got to be the commander now. I've got to, be the sort of. But at the same time, he's got that humor about him. He's got that sort of that nice line and almost this camp quality that he's aware of.
Can I share my favorite line really quick?
Oh yeah, go for it.
Okay, so well, first off, I do want to say that he can be his gruff can be extraordinary. That moment in X-Men Red when WizKid points out what Brand was actually up to, and it cuts to him, and he's just like, just angry facing. But the line from Cable Reloaded was, I'm going to try to do it in a Cable voice. I've been away for a while, taking a long nap of the dirt variety. I laughed out loud when I came across that. It was just so amazing. Like that could have been like a Demolition Man line or something. It was amazing.
That's Cable's a wonderful character, and I kind of do. I feel like that was sort of my first attempt at kind of getting his voice, and I think since then he's mellowed out a little bit, but like still there's that thing of he'll do these action movie lines, he'll do this stuff, and it's I'm much more. I guess I feel like I'm more well disposed to him now than when everybody was taking him 100% seriously,
right?
Including himself. And I mean, I was a lot younger when he first came on the scene. When was that? We're talking late 80s.
Yeah,
like I would have barely been in double figures then, but like. So, we were coming off this, around that time, I kind of moved away from Marvel and got into sort of the Vertigo end of things, because, I was, a moody teenager. It was my me. But like, I think the fact that like, you kind of come back to Cable now and people are sort of aware of like, and we've had things like the nice years around with Deadpool where he was the straight man.
Right.
And it was like, but, straight men are not without their own. They also contribute to the comedy. They also, deliver laugh lines. It's like, Cable is not without humor, and he's not just this sort of machine. So yeah, I do kind of find him like a much more interesting character than I did when I was young. And being introduced to this, like, what is this? Who is this dude who sort of suddenly turned up in New Mutants? And wow, what's happened to the art and all of this? But yeah, Cable Reloaded was kind of, because it was basically designed to take the space of a missing issue of Sword, because we were still going through COVID at that time, so there'd be these skip months.
Mm-hmm.
And one of those was for the second Sword issue, that what would have been Sword 8. Cable Reloaded was what would have been Sword issue 8.
I'm glad it exists.
Yeah, well, it got to be like 10 pages longer, but like, no. So basically I was like, well, we need to have a second issue of Sword involved in this crossover I'm doing, because, we need, for plot purposes, we absolutely have to get the giant bullet. We have to get the giant gun, and we have to get the giant bullet, and we have to sort of set things up for like, the end of it. I think as it turned out, it would have been nice to have one more issue of Guardians, because 18 turned out to be the last, and while writing that, I really wanted to say goodbye to all the characters.
Yeah.
So I indulged myself in ways, where I could have, and possibly for the sake of the crossover, should have taken those pages and given them to the main plot. I couldn't leave that book without saying goodbye. It kind of had to be done.
Guardians is kind of an interesting one, because one thing I think that you do really well is like both Star-Lord and Manifold, I think, are characters that have a lot of like potential that isn't often used in terms of like power sets and things like that. And it's interesting that for both of them, I think you've kind of, without being showy about it, kind of not spoken to existence, either you just realize their powers in a way that hadn't been done in a while. And I think that that's a really interesting thing you do well. And I don't know. I don't really have a question. Good job.
I mean, I think with Manifold, I was pretty much just taking from, his earlier appearances, because he'd been in the run up to Secret Wars. He'd been doing a lot of very heavy stuff in there. He was capable of all of this stuff. I think the only thing I had him do that he hadn't. I had him do a couple of things. I had him like bend light, which is a pretty obvious application, and the carrying a little bit of sun is sort of, it's like applications of powers rather than upping his power level. I think the thing I wanted to do with Manifold was sort of, I thought it was really interesting that like that he'd been on so many other teams. He hadn't really been an X person before, even though he was a mutant. But also, he has a community, he has a nation, and it's like he's got a place where he lives, and it's like, okay, what does Krakoa mean to somebody like that? And it's where he goes to work, it's where he commutes to.
Mm-hmm.
So there was that. So I tried to kind of, I don't know, I tried to sort of get more of that in there, that this wasn't a guy who was so in love with like, the whole dream and the whole X dream. But, I wanted somebody who'd be a little bit, well, I'm with you as long as I agree with you kind of thing. And obviously with Bran, there's eventually that breaking point where he's like, no, you've crossed the line. I don't like this anymore. I'm out. But I don't know. I'd like to kind of, it's always about finding the real estate and finding the space, but I do want to do more with like the brief glimpse we got of like, his family life, and his kind of like, he's got like, he's got Gateway, who's like his mentor and teacher in some ways, but there are other elders he knows who aren't mutants, and just friends of the family that he kind of happen along. I gave Manifold like a human friend, which I'm thinking, hang on, when was man? Because it's like that's almost harking back to the days of Steve Hunter and like pre Mutant Moira, all of these sort of human friends that the X-Men had. And it's like it's kind of interesting that Manifold has this just whole community. I don't know. Because the other thing with Manifold is that he's also sort of like a Wakandan citizen.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, yeah, but once again, he's not from there. He's commuting to there, because everywhere is a footstep away from it. He can just go for a 9 to 5 in Wakanda, sing what T'Challa wants, and then go home to his home. And it's like this. So this sort of honorary Krakoan, honorary Wakandan. He's sort of this, member of the Avengers. He's this sort of citizen of everywhere. But at the same time, who he is he's of the First Peoples of Australia. It's like, that's who he is. That's the baseline, and that kind of that's sort of where he should always go back to, I think.
I do think it's funny that both those characters really had great showcases in tie-ins. The Star-Lord one was a King of Black tie-in. Well, one of them was, where you really got to see his power, and Juan Cabal just absolutely killed it. And then it wasn't King. They were both King of Black tie-ins. Holy crap. Yeah, and then the sword issue, the one page I really liked was where Valerio drew him going, like it was just a splash with like cutouts of him going through places.
That was a King of Black issue.
It was unbelievable. And now, a quick word from one of our sponsors. It's Bad Idea, and the Renegade comic book publisher is back doing their crazy antics. The latest includes putting a comic from Mark Waid and David Lapham, The First Supper, into a recent edition of Previews for Order completely randomly. Or it was the latest, until Bad Idea also snuck a new comic from Joshua Dysart and Kano, The First 7 Days, into the same edition of Previews. Don't worry if you missed it, because you probably should have, as it was hidden under the publisher named B-Side Press with fake creator names. That's how Bad Idea rolls, though, making notable comics with great creators in extraordinarily unusual ways. Keep your eye out for whatever's next with Bad Idea, if you can. And now, back to the show. I did want to ask about characters in specific because I think it's interesting. There's two characters in the current state that I think you do particularly well. Abigail Brand, a character who has like one foot on the side of good and one on the bad. More bad right now, but she's pragmatist. Yeah. And then there's Sunspot, a character who's kind of like a service level idiot who actually is like a complete player in the background. And you do really, I mean, I say the service level. He's trying to use that as a smokescreen to operate in his space. Do you feel like you have a character type you particularly enjoy?
I mean, I like it's sort of the same the same kind of thing I do where I'll go and look at old issues of comics and, by different writers, and I'll sort of draw lines and do all this stuff. I can do the same thing with my own comics and go like, oh, hey, what if this was happening in the background the whole time? And so that's, I do have a certain, when you apply that to like a schema character or somebody with kind of secret plans, I'm good at the beat where like, it was always meant to be this thing. Peter Ayala has a thing where they call it like never didn't have it, and that's become a kind of slang term, a kind of colloquialism in the X-Trade where like anytime we have a thing where it's like, oh, if we do this, we can say we plan to do it all along. So never didn't have it, and it's like Storm never dying, and now that coming to like the Sinisters that's an evident habit, But like, it's the thing I guess the thing, Brandon's Sunspot, they've both got the scheming thing in common, but they're two sort of different archetypes in that one is like the kind of, I'm not really willing to kind of say that people who torture or approve of torture are good people.
That's true. I guess she's positioned as good.
Yeah, this is the thing. Brand was this sort of like at a time when the cultural attitude to torture was extremely horrible in that it was like, oh yeah, Jack Bauer, he's our man. If he can't do it, nobody can, that sort of thing. Enhanced interrogation. It's like, oh, this is, the good guys have to be tough and make hard choices and all of this. That was her time to shine. That was when she really, but it was like she was introduced as, her first appearance is like justifying the torture of Colossus. So, there's an element of kind of getting back to that. And, I don't always hang, the passive characters around their neck like millstones like that. But it's like at a certain point, there's a level of like, yeah, this archetype is not a good archetype. This person is not a good person. Whereas with Roberto, it's a little more like I really liked him as the sort of chaotic master planner that Jonathan turned him into in Secret Wars, or the run-up to Secret Wars, where he was sort of like, he was like the rich idiot, this kind of extreme version of like the Clement character, but like then he kind of became this like, oh, actually, it turns out that with all of my money and resources and all this stuff, I can do all of this. And it's like, okay. And then when it came time for me to sort of run with that character a little bit, I was really interested in carrying that on. I wanted to kind of see what that looked like pushed to an extreme. So there's a definite thing where I don't want him to be stupid.
Mm-hmm.
I want him to be arrogant, incredibly vain, but beneath that, incredibly vain, confidence at like the absolute verge of arrogance, very, flamboyant. Underneath that shell, there's like there's a real human being who kind of is carrying a lot around. His first love died in his arms. It's like, that's not something you get over, and it's not something you kind of stop carrying around with you. That's probably like a big moral motivator to him to kind of like try to avoid anything like that happening again. But also there's a kind of smarts under that, which ties into the other thing about his old characterization, which was always like, this is the new mutant who is most likely to go evil.
Mm-hmm.
And he does, there's alternate futures where he does go evil, and he's like, no, yeah, look, I did what I thought was right, and I still think it's right. And, I'm sorry you don't agree, past friends, but like, tough. And so, he's got that in him, but also there's that thing of like when there's a scene I think John Byrne wrote or drew, Magneto's sort of joined the Hellfire Club at this point, and it's like, Roberto's like, we'll never join you, and Magneto goes, you will be the first.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that comes true. I think Roberto is the first new mutant to join the Hellfire Club. I think before, I think in the interregnum of the 90s, where I wasn't really paying much attention at the time, but I think that's when he is that guy. He becomes a member of the Hellfire Club. And it's like, but there's that thing of like, having set up that like Rainfire aside, having set up that like he will become a villain thing, what's the most interesting to do with it? And it's like, well, I will use my villain powers for good purpose. And it's like, and that's the thing I love doing with him, where he's sort of, he's always scheming, he's always got master plan, he's always building like giant robots and like insane stuff. And he ran AIM for a while.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, but it's just we're all having a good time here. I'm not being a bad, just because I'm acting like a supervillain doesn't mean I'm a bad guy.
Yeah. The AIM thing is really funny because it's like he buys a terrorist organization and then he's like, I'm going to do it right this time. And you're like, oh, I don't know about that. But all right, I just have a few more questions. When I put out to patrons that you were coming on the podcast, the thing that came up the most was something I mentioned earlier, tie-ins. Uh-huh. That was something we kind of briefly talked about. But basically, the repeated question is like, those are tough. A lot of people struggle with them. You seem to do really well with them. What's the secret?
The secret is every like standard tie-in, so not a special that you're kind of willing into existence purely for the purpose of being a tie-in. Every normal tie-in issue is firstly, over everything, it is another issue of your book. I mean, the aim of the book, because I see a lot of people, they'll see the banner on the top of it, or the Nabisco corner or whatever, and they'll go like, oh, I'm skipping that. No, you want to make them regret that because it's another issue of your book. It just happens to be. It's like, and I probably get this from like the old Secret Wars 2 tie-ins, which, my introduction to Marvel was reprints of Secret Wars. And that started with, the 12 issues that were entirely set on Battleworld, and then continued into all of Secret Wars 2, with a couple of like minor exceptions. I think things like ROM, all of the things that they didn't have rights to or were just so out of the way as to be, we might as well not. But like every Secret Wars 2 tie-in, and also a whole bunch of issues either side of those tie-ins. So, I got a real lesson in how kind of, you get like what was going on in Fantastic Four, and then the Secret Wars 2 of it all would be like the Beyonder would just turn up and be like, well, I've been watching you just go through the plot you were going to do anyway, and let me help you with that by saving you the bus fare home. And it was always something like that. He'd turn up and it would be like, or, there'd be one issue that was like, there was that Daredevil issue where the Beyonder is the entire plot. But like most of them are like, you go in, the Beyonder turns up, and it's like the X-Men issues where like Rachel keeps trying to kill him. And it's like, that's a key part of Rachel's development, is that whole, you can draw direct lines from her inability to do anything about the Beyonder, and her extremely questionable methods of attempting to do something about the Beyonder, to like her assassination run on Selene, and like, which, leads to her getting stabbed by Wolverine, and the and everything that comes from that. But it's all this sort of, it's all part of the whole. It's like very rarely could you have skipped over one of those Secret Wars 2 tie-ins, because, in an effort to avoid seeing the Beyonder's face entirely, you would be just removing an enormous chunk of the regular story, because it was the regular story. It just happened to have this connection to something else that was going on at the same time. And it's like, as long as that is how you do tie-ins, it's just regular issues of your book, regular parts of the story. I feel like Loki, I ended up doing this a lot because there were so many tie-ins he had to be in.
Yeah.
Like, there was no way to keep him out of the Axis crossover. It was just built that way. So, he had to, 4 issues of the book had to be Axis ties. And it was like, okay, well, how do I get from A to B? I'll do it like this. How do I support the themes that I'm doing? I'll do it like this. And it's like, that's always got to be the thing. How is this not a detour? How is this the route?
Right.
And how do I use the basic premise of this crossover? Because every crossover has a basic premise. How do I use that to tell the story that I want to tell, to explore the things that I want to explore? So you got to be, a little bit selfish, while at the same time, I really don't like it my least favorite tie-ins, including ones I've done, are the ones where it's a red sky, where and like we slapped that Civil War II banner on a lot of issues in New Avengers, and it was like those were the last issues in New Avengers. That was going to be the last trade. We knew it. It was like, and through our own fault that time, we thought, oh, we'll renumber it. It'll be cool. No, should have just gone straight on to issue 19. But basically that was an example of like we very much used the Civil War II setup to further our own goals and knock a couple of dominoes over. However, people faithfully going to the Secret War II banner would have felt a little shortchanged, and I do feel bad about that.
Yeah.
So, you've got to, it's a lot to kind of keep in the air when you're writing a tie.
You and Rom and Brian did a really good job on the Dark Web stuff with Venom, because frankly, no offense to Dark Web, I didn't really have a lot of interest in reading that. I knew that you and Rom were very good at writing for those things, for tie-ins, and you made it work. It seemed like it proved to be a jump off to what you wanted to do anyways.
That's an example of like, we knew about that far enough in advance, or rather we were writing our own books far enough out that we could plan for it. In fact, we were, because of Brian, who is, these days he's the entire package. He's like a machine. Amazing pages.
17 straight.
Yeah, 17 straight. That number tells you the entire story. I think it's actually 16. I think 17 is Cafu's first, but like...
Oh, God, yeah.
But even so, 16 straight. I have emails now that are like, I think we can get so-and-so to issue 10. And it's like that, as if that's, oh my God, we've engineered a miracle here.
Yeah.
But it's like 16 issues straight, a record by any standards. But like the flip side of that on the writing front was that we had to write very, very far ahead to keep up with it. So we were like getting into the dark web of it all. I think we were the first. We were always the first to get our issues done for those months. And like that meant that what we could do was like, because I knew where I wanted Eddie to get to, and I knew where he was starting from. And Ron was the same with Don. And it was like, well, we can route Eddie through this, and we can use the whole Councilman Maddie of it all to transition him into Bedlam. And then Zed would like, oh, can we have a big classic Venom for a bit? And I'd be like, yeah, sure, we'll do that. That'll be great. But like, yeah, it was, we knew this. It's like with the whole, like with Loki, with the thing where like we needed to get to this point. We can use this mechanism to do that. We can use the mechanism of the web to get Eddie through this crucial stage that he needs to get to in order to get to what we've got planned for him afterwards. And also, we need him to get out of the gun somehow. Well, he needs to be Maddie. What if he goes to limbo? And that became the thing which I'm very proud of, which, I might have come to anyway, in which, without Dark Web, I might have come to this, which was like, okay, have you tried jumping sideways in time? And that was just something like, how does he get to limbo? Oh, well, that's just like lateral thinking. And, I was very happy with myself that day when I wrote that bit of dialogue. But like, I don't know if I would have come to that without the need for Eddie and Maddie to link up. I don't know if I would have come up with it. Maybe I would have had him, Dr. Doom would have come by and like kidnapped him or something, or Kang would have come by. We'd have had Kang come back and go like, okay, it's been 1,000 years since we last met, and I need you for a thing.
I just want to say I love how like the whole scene where Kang is like, oh, my old friend Eddie. I love how like dialogues can just speak into existence this like relationship that we never knew about before. It's very Doctor Who.
That was fun. That was always a thing. I always had this, because that was one of the things that we did in the Free Comic Book Day. And there's a few things that I think we still haven't got to, which, we probably should. But there were a couple of things where like that first Free Comic Book Day was like, okay, we'll do 3 issues. Well, we'll do 3 pages each from the first issue. And there'll be like, a teaser trailer kind of thing. And then we'll do 2 pages that are like snapshots.
Right.
And I think I've done all of mine now. I think I have. But like one of those was Kang and Venom fighting with lightsabers.
Mm-hmm.
And, I got to like the Kang. Okay, this is because I knew in the first 10 issues I had to take care of like all of those. Ron was thinking a lot further ahead. I was basically thinking like, okay, my issues out of the first 10 issues are going to look like this. We're going to set up this lovely time knot and then resolve it. And then from there we can start building on it. But yeah, it came time to do the Kang issue. And it was like, oh man, where's he going to get a lightsaber from? And so, I'd sort of given myself this, this problem, this minor problem to solve. But yeah, no, it's a lot of fun. With Venom now, I think it was really amazing working with Brian. It's really great working with Cafu again in different ways. In that, like, I did work with him for like four and a bit issues of Valkyries, and seeing pages come in from him again is wonderful. It's always great.
He's really underrated. I really like his stuff, but I never thought until this moment how strong of a fit King is for you as a character. Like, I feel like given your ability to play with history and everything like that, that's a very good character. But I don't want to go down that path. Two more things. One thing I want to bring up is artists. So you mentioned Brian, you mentioned Cafu. I do think it's interesting how you have some projects that have like specific art requirements. Like Tom Riley and Jordi Belair had to do era specific art. And so in that case, you were writing differently because you were writing for specific eras. But I'm curious as to, as much as possible, do you try to tailor your scripts to specific artists, or is that something that you don't always know about, so you can't always do that?
I try to an extent. It's a mixture of tailoring it to specific artists and kind of artist proofing it, in that, like, if I know an artist well and I've worked with them a bunch and I've got a very strong idea of what they're capable of and what they excel at, I will almost subconsciously, I guess, write to that. It kind of comes to a point when, you've been in a very long relationship with somebody where if you do have an idea of how they're going to handle something to an extent that you stop checking the artwork when it comes in.
Like Javier Rodriguez, for example.
Yeah, well, Javier, God, I love everything he does. Javier is my absolute favorite, which, is a terrible thing to say about artists because, I've worked with so many. But I always love working with him. And Defenders really was such a labor of love. But generally, the ideal thing is like when a page comes into the inbox and you just look at it and it's like, yeah, great. And then you go and you put the dialogue over it and it all flows. But with Javier, it was more, he's the only person I've really done this with. Usually I give at least an idea of how. So quite sure I did this again for Tom Riley recently.
And Fury.
On Fury. So yes, I did this again for Tom Riley on that. I usually put down like number of panels per page, just sort of guide, rough guide, as much help me, but also it helps me work out where the page turns are and, where the beats land. But like with Javier, I started, we started going back and forth and like, okay, how about if I just do your screenplay kind of thing and then we went so far that I think Defenders 4, which might be my favorite issue out of both runs, I just kind of gave him this. I'd be like, okay, this is what happens on this page. And it'd be just like a kind of this long prose description. It wasn't like, page 4 and 5, they have a fight. It was like a sort of long prose description of like what happens here. And like that was a little too much, but it did produce Defenders 4, which was incredible. And then I went back and it was like, okay, now I'm going to write all of the dialogue, and I hadn't had any dialogue in the original plot because it was pure plot. And it was like, and it was like Doctor Strange is sort of saying something like this. I'd sort of have the dialogue as part of a description of the scene. But we eventually landed on this thing where I sort of went back to a kind of screenplay format, plotting by dialogue, but without the panels, because I knew that any layout I'd get back from Javier would be perfect. Exactly what the story needed, exactly what the page needed, exactly the thing. To the point that like Defenders Beyond 5 was like, I had absolute confidence in him that we actually ended on a complete act of symbolism. And that like, eventually we're going to explain what that crown is, but like we felt confident that we could end that way, that we could sort of present you with a pure image and like just allow that to unlock something within the reader. And people really dug it. People really got excited by that. And then recently with the Tom Ray for the Fury thing, and this was a pure accident because I didn't know Tom was going to be doing that thing, but it was like, I want to get some of that Steranko vibe, and I can't do that if I'm giving you numbers of panels. I'm going to block out like his, all of the dialogue, all of the action beats. Go wild with it, go nuts with it. Do break this down however you wish. Unless I'm completely remembering and I put in, because there are some bits of that same special where I was like, okay, now we have a tier of 4 panels. But I don't think that was a segment for that. I think uniquely out of that whole special, it required a total lack of guidance on panel, layout. Because usually I'll do 5 panels on this page or 4 panels on this page. I'll sort of specify which panel I'm thinking of in my head as like the biggie. And the artist will, follow that or not. And it's fine whatever they want to do, to be honest. But it's because I will go in and do the lettering draft and sort of tailor the script to what they have produced in terms of art.
The last thing I actually want to bring up, though, was another project you worked with an amazing artist on, Simone DeMeo.
Oh, yeah.
But I specifically want to ask about, We Only Find Them When They're Dead, just recently ended after a 15-issue run. You also wrote a prose story for 3 Worlds, 3 Moons with Nimit Malavia called Havo's Wager?
Yeah.
Both of those books are interesting in the sense that, or both of those things are different in the sense that they're completely different than what you're doing for Marvel. They feel like you pushing your writing in ways you wouldn't normally be able to do because they're your own domain. Do you feel like it's good for you as a writer to kind of scratch different itches from time to time to kind of push yourself? Because it's like there's always going to be like a constraint at Marvel to some degree, even though you've got some space to work with there.
I think there is that, in that there'll always be those sort of limitations, but also you can get very used to bouncing off those walls and almost using them as a crutch, in that I really enjoy working in a shared universe with history and, a kind of deep 60-year knowledge. I kind of feel like with We Only Find Them When They're Dead, it was like breaking out of that to create my own universe and do my own thing with, Simone doing so much visually on the visual side that, he's got equal, it was absolutely kind of 50-50 thing. I'll very quickly talk about Havo's Wager. That was I wanted to do a thing that was not a comic because I basically, I didn't want to I'm still in an exclusive with Marvel. And I thought, well, if I do them a prose story, then that's perfect because it might be a slight gray area. But also I just wanted to do a prose story because I feel like the whole point of doing stuff that is not completely owned by me, but for other people, like Jonathan and Steve Wackett, is they're really going to be open to me playing around and doing experiments and fun stuff. And it was so nice to sort of do a pro story and have that illustrated. It was a really fun thing to do, and I really enjoyed kind of scratching that prose itch. And I think part of that was because, I want to write some prose again. I want to get back into that. I want to get back into, writing short stories. And this one came out really good. And I was like, it's really great that the kind of 3W3M universe has that capability it's kind of the driving force of the whole project, as I understand it, is that they're opening themselves to this kind of experimentation. I was able to sort of, when I kind of designed the religious stuff for them, the way it was pitched to me was I'm doing an independent project and we are going to show the working. So I was thinking, okay, so this will be so I really put a lot into that pitch, and I think Jonathan ended up printing all of it, including the noodling, all of the thoughts, and then, the last 2 pages of it, which were the actual, okay, this is how all the religious stuff works. And I mean, something like that is just so out of the ordinary. That's the kind of stuff that excites me now, the sort of out of the ordinary stuff. And in my own projects, I'm thinking in terms of stuff that I'm not doing elsewhere that's very different to, anything else I'm getting up to. I have been working on a creator-owned thing that's been sort of on, the actual writing of it keeps getting pushed back. It's a horrible thing to admit, but it is slightly more difficult when you don't have somebody yelling at you. But I do have something on the back burner that I did kind of, I guess I'm still working out the sort of format of it all. But one thing I want to get into is games in that, like, I want to do more choose your own adventure type stuff, or I guess I should call it like pick your own path, or some non-copyrighted version of choose your own adventure. Fantasy fighting, but like something Jack Stevenson's magicness, but like some one of these sort of choose your own adventure type things, and like I've kind of got a game system. That is the last hint I will drop about future projects, because this one is really slow. This one is coming along really slowly. I don't want to make a big announcement about this one, but like eventually I will bring that into being when I'm not doing 20 Marvel things.
I will say that is definitely one way to get people to yell at you, is say that something is coming, get them excited, and then they're going to motivate you to do it. But one way or another, everyone's motivated to get more from you, Al, because you are always great at what you do. I really appreciate you taking the time to come on here and talk about everything you're working on.
Oh, no, thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with writer Al Ewing. You can find him on his newsletter, on Ghost.io, and his work in X-Men Red, Wasp, Venom, and more. Thanks to Deanna Chapman for stepping in to edit this week's podcast. If it sounds better than usual, it's because of her. Love Off Panel, want to support it? Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts today and give the show a rating or review while you're at it, but 5 stars only. You can also support the show by backing it on Patreon. Find the show at patreon.com/offpanel, and when you back it on there, you get early access to each week's podcast as well as weekly content and more. Want even more? Subscribe to my subscription comic site Sketched at sketch.com for long-form articles, interviews, and the rest of the site's content. You can find Off Panel and Sketched on social media by following on Twitter and Instagram at @sketchcomic or following me at @SliceFriedGold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Kevin Byde, Tom Evans, Natalie Mockery, Darcy Van Polgeest, Reed Beeman, Kelly Sudaconic, Max Wood, Jeremy Lambert, Brian, Matteo Ciccati, Chris Doré, Near Levy, Dennis Hoffman, Jason Hussa, Cancel Comics, Kieran Gillen, Jonathan Kent Uratam, Henry Johnson, Jingo Boren, James Tynan IV, Chris Langford, Jason Wood, Tom Peachy, Ben Damstead, Rom V, Devin Fitzsimons, Nick Walker, Patrick Coyle, Isaac Oren, Scott Carpenter, Rent Narb Studios Comics, Nicholas Palmieri, Capes and Tights Podcast, Klaus Van de Ven, Brian, Submed Industries, Raj Patel, Jack Mulqueen, Kyle, Carl Kerschel, Robert Masella, Elzo Chartier, Luke Nakashoji, Dr. Luke, Scott Hazelwood, Michael Tunk, Canadian by Proxy, Johnny Cannon, Bradley Rader, Carl Choi, Brandon DePillis, Patrick Broward, Declan Shalvey, Dan Garino, Josh Williamson, Adam Freeman, Ben Wild, Brian Klein Q, SB, Nick Bennett, Daniel Whitfield, Susanna Polo, Reed Hinkley Barnes, Mario Tiambang, AbductedTheComic.com, Andrew Carita, Matt Mahoney, Stephen Hall, Pensacola Pop Comics, Kim Eslin, Philip Myra, Christian Shelton, Kenny Porter, Chris Pachala, Torrin Grunbeck, Buzz Bubbles, Christopher Todd, Transmitter Down, Waltz Comics and Books, Danny Ollie, Paul Salates, Akil Wilson, Alex Dimitriopoulos, Terry Dodson, Wesley Giff, Sean Kirkham, Alistair Ross, Julio Anta, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Paul Reinwan, Vita Ayala, Dave Slusher, Akil, Kokachi, Sean Pinello, Ken Heidelman, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, David Kelly, Rob Wilson IV, Nick Polito, Brendan Fletcher, Jonathan Nilsson, Jason Massey, Adam Bogart, Matthew Taylor, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Baraldi, Nick Hall, Bjorn Basin, John Hendricks, Steve Anderson, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Chang, Colin McMahon, Chris Palmer, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Kat McKenzie, Adam Highfield, Fiona Stables, Mark Abnett, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim Demonakos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to Wolfpack for letting me use their song Outro as the show's opening theme, and to Upright T-Rex Music, who wrote and performed Off Panel's outro and ad music just for the show. Check out their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.